So I'm going to get started and folks can continue to just log in as they arrive. My name is Jim Tassi. I'm the Assistant Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. And I want to talk to you today about the State Active Transportation Plan process, what it is, how you can provide input. So we're going to just talk about what the plan seeks to do and what the opportunities to get your input on it are. The Bicycle Coalition of Maine is a sub-consultant with VHB on this plan. So we are part of the team working on this plan. And we're very happy to have that role. And let's just jump right in. Remember, please, I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves if they're not speaking. Matt, you might be able to just blanket mute everyone. So see if you can do that. So the Active Transportation Plan is part of the DOT's family of plans, which all feed into their long-range transportation plan. And this is a real sort of interest of the commissioner. He wants to have just sort of a unified suite of plans created. And for this round of updates, the DOT is working on a strategic transit plan, a rail plan, a aviation plan, and the active transportation plan. And you can get information on all of the plans and links to some of the other portals that are available in the process via the link that we're going to paste into the chat box right now. So that gives you access to the entire DOT site about the long-range plans and the family of plans. The Active Transportation Plan is the first time, the Maine DOT has ever taken a systematic approach to planning for active transportation. And so what they're doing is starting with a sort of assessment of where we are. So the three questions are, where are we now? Where do we want the state to go with respect to active transportation? And how are we going to get there from where we are now to where we want to go? The plan is conceived of as really sort of a policy-driven plan is the way it's been characterized. So that what we're looking at are not only specific locations and needs, but trying to come up with a kind of policy environment that will kind of systematically and consistently guide the DOT as it builds out the active transportation system in Maine. Yeah, I'll just move to the next slide. So the scope of work for the whole plan is as follows. There is task one, and these are not necessarily chronological, although they look that way a little bit. But the first task is public engagement, of which this webinar is part. And I've got most of this presentation is going to really focus on public engagement, so I'll get back to that in more detail shortly. There is an existing conditions assessment where we do assessments of policies and education programming that's available around bike ped and active transportation issues. Sarah Cushman of Transportation, Sarah Cushman Transportation LLC is doing the policy analysis, and that we've been in the loop on that too. And that's afforded the opportunity to look at like draft complete streets policies, speed limit policies and other policies that are important to how the DOT does its business. One of the tasks of the entire plan is to assess state-owned inactive rail corridors for possible conversion into rail trails. There are 4 that are going to be looked at. I'll have a slide on that in a little bit. There is a final kind of needs assessment, and then we move into the drafting and final report phase of the process. So this is just give you a snapshot of what some of the deliverables look like. This is the education program inventory that the BCM created. And what this does is it just
You're muted.
I think you had muted.
Yeah, you hit your mute button.
Oh, well, no, I think there's a blanket mute, a blanket mute action that happened, and it got me too, apparently.
Sorry.
No problem. But what I was saying is this is one of the outputs for the plan. This is a graph that simply shows the different types of bike ped education programs that are out there, what their geographic reach is, and how frequently they're offered, whether it's all the time, which is green, kind of intermittently, which is orange, and not too often, which is yellow. And okay, next slide. And additional component of the planning process is going to be to analyze highway corridor priority 3 and 4 roads. And in Vermont, we call them class roads kind of, but so these are designations that sort of how important are they to the overall transportation system. HCP 3s and 4s are less important, from the standpoint of moving motor vehicles around, but are really valuable for people who like to ride bikes, in the rural countryside. These are usually the kind of roads that are being used. And the idea here is that we're going to try to identify certain key corridors that really need attention with respect to the installation of shoulders. The criteria here that you see are what we're going to be looking at as we kind of decide, which roads kind of rise to the top with respect to that need. And I've bolded at the top community input because I was very concerned that we want to make sure that we hear from bike riders and walkers in the rural and quieter parts of the state about where they're doing their walking and bicycling, so that we know there is need there. Other things we're going to look at are traffic volume, speed, the crash history, residential density. It's like it makes sense to put investment where people are going to be and where it's going to be used. So we're trying to put a radius around some of these locations of about half a mile, so that we can identify whether there are trip drivers, people and people actually needing to get out on those roads. So that's going to be part of the criteria. Nearness to other active transportation destinations. So like, if it hooks up with a multi-use path, that will help it score a little higher. Proximity to low income groups, so that we're making sure underserved folks have the same access as everyone else in the state. Again, connectivity, and whether there are opportunities to fill in short gaps in long corridors. That low hanging fruit with respect to making a more continuous shoulder along a whole corridor. And this will all be leavened a little bit with concerns about engineering and permitting issues. So those are the kind of things we're going to be looking at. The AT plan is going to also provide an assessment of 4 state-owned inactive rail corridors for interim trail use. And interim trail use, I mean, all multi-use paths and rail corridors in Maine are considered interim use. They could always at some point be reversed, but that's never happened in the state. Nonetheless, the law preserves the right to reverse that if necessary. There's about 106 miles total that's being assessed by this plan. That includes the Calais branch way up here in Washington County. It includes the lower road, Augusta to Brunswick, right here. The Berlin subdivision line, which is from Auburn to Portland. And then the Mountain Division line from Freiburg to Gorham are all the corridors that are being looked at for possible conversion into multi-use trails. So the part I really wanted to lean into is how can you guys get involved, the public engagement piece. And this is what BCM was really brought on the team to facilitate, most importantly. So there are basically 4 elements of public input provided in this whole process. One is public meetings. There are going to be stakeholder meetings. There's going to be a survey that's going to go around soon. And there's a thing called the PIMA site, which I will talk about in a second. So with respect to public meetings, the first one is next week. So that's happening March 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. You can register for this with the link that we are putting in the chat box. There will be a grand total of 4 of these meetings. The additional meetings will happen on the 6th of April, May 4th, and June 7th. And the meetings are going to be kind of iterative. They're going to repeat some of the same content. They're all going to cover all 4 of the member plans in the family of plans. So active transportation, rail, aviation, and transit are all going to be covered. Everyone is invited. And there is, as we've been talking about these plans, there is going to be incremental development at each public meeting, so that the breakout sessions in particular are going to afford opportunities to dive deeper into other questions and hopefully provide, some good granular input as well. So the first public meeting again, next week, and the breakout or the kind of structure of these plans are as follows. it's going to begin with about 15 to 20-minute overview by DOT staff of the whole family of plans concept. So you'll understand how the active transportation plan fits into the context of the larger family of plans. That overview is then going to be followed by a breakout, and there's going to be a breakout for each of the 4 plans, and they're going to be offered twice. Each breakout is going to include a brief plan overview for the AT plan. DOT staff will provide a quick overview of the plan, and some of it will go into more detail on the kind of stuff I've talked about today. And then we'll segue into a public discussion, and I'll preview some of the questions that we'll be considering in a second. You all have the option of joining up to 2 breakouts. So you could do, the rail plan and the active transportation plan, or you could do the active transportation plan twice if you wanted to stay in and kind of continue a conversation that was moving along. So you have some flexibility in how you participate in the breakouts and what you want to put some attention to. And again, as I mentioned, like the goal of at least this first public meeting is to kind of assess whether or not we're going in the right direction. Are our evaluation criteria right? Is the scope, are the things we're doing, in sync with what the public would like to see? So we're looking for clarification questions related to the scope and purpose, the vision, or how we're doing outreach about the ATP. Number 2 is a question that's near and dear to my heart. I think, based on your sense of what active transportation needs in Maine are, what policy program or funding priorities would you like to see the Maine DOT incorporate in the future? So there will be the opportunity to say, this is what I would like to see Maine DOT do. And then, a little bit of granularity here with some conversation about, what are the kind of road and inactive, rail corridors that you think should be prioritized for improvements, based on places you currently or would like to walk, bike, or roll. So again, some of these may be the HCP 3 and 4 type roads in the rural countryside where you're riding. So we might get information about that. But you might have an observation about the Route 1 corridor in Biddeford or something like that, and say, yeah, we really need to make that a more bikeable and walkable place. So we're not going to have a lot of time to do that at this phase in the plan, but there are ways that you can get more detailed comments into the system. And so more on that to come. The next phase of public engagement is the stakeholder meetings, which we're just kind of beginning the rollout of now. These are kind of small invitation, kind of focus group type meetings that are going to be for specific constituencies, such as, public health folks, environmental folks, aging adults, MPOs, folks like that are all going to be invited to specific meetings. I imagine many of the folks on this call are on my stakeholder list, and you'll begin to receive notifications as soon as later today to invite you to meetings and figure out when we can get together and chat about this. The format is still being developed a little bit, but we're planning to do this pretty immediately. We're going to jump right into these meetings and hope to get through most of them in March and or April. So it's the whole plan has a fairly constrained time frame, and we're trying to move expeditiously on this. So stay tuned. We'll be in touch, and I hope you can join us for a conversation. There will also be a survey made available shortly, that we'll send out to all kinds of stakeholders and the public in general. That is in development and hopefully will be ready to go live in early April. We'll be using what's called the MetroQuest platform that the DOT uses. It's kind of a fun survey in that it's got almost like a video game quality to it in some senses, like where you're able to prioritize specific projects by moving gold coins into a particular line item or something like that. So stay tuned for that. The question will also include questions about what are the barriers that you think prevent people from using active transportation as a way to get around more. Why aren't you walking or biking more? And so getting some input on that will be important. And again, that prioritization tool that I just mentioned is likely going to be part of the final survey. It is still in development. So that is something you'll be hearing more about from the BCM communications team as it comes together. Now, this thing, the Public Input Management Application Site, called PIMA for short, this is live, and this is, going to be live for the duration, and it permits you to provide extremely detailed, as well as very, broad stroke input on what you think the state needs to do around active transportation. And there is a link that we'll be pasting into the chat box right now that'll take you to this site. You have to put in a little bit of sort of registration information, and then it takes you to this this page. This box here on the left is a series of videos that talks about the family of plans. I've highlighted the active transportation plan because that's the one we're working on. But really, this sidebar here on the right is where the meat of this site is. This is where you have a field where you can enter, a comment about a specific location, a policy, any kind of issue you want to raise. Down below, you click the plan that your comment is most germane to. So I'm hoping most of you guys will offer comments on the active transportation plan. And as you scroll down on that site, you get additional options. So this map feature here on the sidebar lets you actually identify a particular location and link it to your comment. So this is the opportunity to say, the crosswalk at the end of my street is really not in good shape. If you want to get that kind of granular input into the plan, you could do that here. We right now, it does not appear that we are able to do corridor level inputs on this map. So, we're having conversations about how we can get information about longer stretches, not just points, but this is a great place to begin. And certainly if you dropped a point in a corridor and said you were talking about a corridor, that would probably suffice to make your point clear. I think that this little bar down the bottom is kind of interesting, where you get to kind of gauge your level of support, where green means you have strong support for this plan and the project that you're talking about, and moving into the red means that your support's less strong. It's sort of a gauge of sentiment. That concludes the overview. To stay up to date on information about the active transportation plan, you can visit we're running a series of posts about the plan in progress. The latest one we're going to paste a link to in the chat box. If you go to bikemaine.org, you will always find a link to the active transportation plan prominently displayed. So you'll be able to always just go to our main site and from the homepage navigate to a spot where there's more information about what's going on. And we invite you to follow us at Bike Maine on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and most recently TikTok, which has been interesting and is really a hot platform these days. So I'm going to stop my share for now, and we're going to open it up to questions. If you do have a question, if you could please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we'll get to you as quickly as you can. The other thing you can do is type a question into the chat box, and we'll do our best to get to all those questions. All right.
We got a couple that are in there already, Jim, if you want me to read them off.
Sure. Why don't we go with the ones in the chat box?
So the first one we had that's unanswered is the agenda for the meetings in April to June the same as the one for March 15th?
My understanding is yes, that I mean, at least structurally, it's going to include an overview of the family of plans. And then there's going to be a breakout that's going to have, a more detailed conversation that is incrementally different from what happens at the first one. So, as more issues come in and as we hear more input from the public, some of the discussion questions might be tweaked to kind of take us to, different sort of issues to emphasize. But the essential structure is going to be an overview and then a breakout session and then a breakout session. Although DOT has reserved the right to, change it if the model that they've currently devised doesn't feel like it's working.
Great. So we got one that says, how is this process going to address securing input from underserved populations to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion with this planning process and its recommendations?
That's a great question, and it's one that we are working on. So in the stakeholder meetings, we are including a social justice group, and we are identifying, various stakeholders that will be represented in that group. We were at first going to try and just sprinkle, like integrate that social justice population throughout the process, and like say you could attend any meeting you wanted, but we felt that we would get more genuine and unvarnished responses if we created a particular group that was united by the common denominator issue of seeking social justice. So this group will include the LGBTQ community, BIPOC communities, tribal communities. We're going to be including folks from the homeless advocacy world. And if you have additional suggestions for groups or organizations that can represent these populations, please be in touch and let us know so that we can add them to the stakeholder list, or at least, consider adding them to the stakeholder list.
Related question to that, how do we know if we're on your stakeholder list or get on it if we're not?
If you have a strong desire in being on it, you could send us an email. You could send me a. Let me fill my inbox. You could send a note to me saying interested in stakeholder meeting, and send along who you are and what group you represent. The stakeholder list has been reviewed by DOT and is largely finalized, but I keep telling them, expect additional revisions to be made as conditions on the ground evolve.
Okay. Somebody commented that they tried to register for the March 15th meeting. It says the site only allows you to sign up for one breakout room.
We will make a note of that and inform DOT of that. That's outside our control, and so that's great feedback to get. I'm going to take a break from the chat questions because I know that we have at least one hand up. How many more questions are there in chat, Matt?
There looks like there's just one more question in there.
All right, one more question, and then I'll move on to Jim Fisher, who's patient. I guess it's a still photo of Jim, so he doesn't look like he's moving much, but he looks patient.
The last one is, do you know if NACTO's urban bikeway design guide is going to be adopted as the standards that the DOT uses?
So various design guides have been discussed in the policy review. And so the NACTO materials are certainly in the conversation and in the mix. And, we are strong advocates for adopting some of the guidance that NACTO provides. So I think that's a great point, and one that, you can, at the public meetings and on the PEMA site, that's the kind of recommendation that is like spot on what they're looking for. Like what should be the kinds of guides that are going to lead the DOT into the 21st century. So great comment. Make sure you make it, on one of the platforms so that it gets entered into the record. Great. Okay, so you can continue to put questions into the chat. I'm going to ask Jim Fisher to ask his question, and please, if you have questions, you can also raise your hand.
I kind of look like the still image. I'll mention with the DOT sign up, I think that they were saying indicate the one you most want to go to, but it wasn't really signing up. It was just giving them an idea of the numbers they'd have in each group. I'm assuming on the day of the event, there'll be a chance to choose your breakouts. So they'll do some crossover partway through, I assume. You'll go from one group to another.
You can, yes. My understanding is, and again, this is the tech that, they're in charge of that. And so we're working within their confines. But what we've been told is that people can attend up to 2 breakouts. There will be a little bit of repetition, like the breakout sessions will have the same sort of overview before you get to the kind of public discussion.
At any rate.
Yeah, there'll be a transfer moment.
Thank you for doing this. I'm glad that MaineDOT is going at the active transportation plan again. I really don't think this is the first time. We've had variations of this going back at least 25 years, but I'm glad it's happening. I was pushing for something like this when we were going through the climate change discussions and the Maine Won't Wait climate action planning. And they seem to put most of their eggs in the electric vehicle basket. And I'm hoping that this is somehow connected with that initiative and that they're really looking at bikes and walking and other muscle-powered modalities as a way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and reduce our impact on climate change. Are you aware of how connected you are with the climate action plan at this point?
We're pretty connected. It's absolutely informing the conversation. You know, BCM has been a member of the transportation work group right from the beginning. Joyce Taylor of the DOT is the chair of the transportation work group. The DOT is sponsoring this plan. So there's pretty good integration and awareness of the role that this plan can play in helping to guide the state through the impending climate crisis.
Anyway, that was my main point. I want to make sure we keep hitting that point and they don't try to solve this problem entirely with electric vehicles, because that's going to be difficult.
Well, I agree, you know, and it's like, as I often say, getting hit by an electric car is just as bad as getting hit by a petroleum powered car. So, you know, from the standpoint of making things better out there for people to walk and bike in Maine, getting a mode shift out of the single occupancy vehicle is important.
And one last quick point as a town manager now for a small town, Deer Isle, I really want to advocate that this plan include towns and include thoughts of how we can help local roads programs do a better job with being available to all users.
Again, a great comment, Jim, and you know, make sure it gets into the PEMA site or into the comments through one of the platforms, you know, on the survey. I mean, there are multiple opportunities, but that's exactly the kind of stuff that they need to hear. And I think you're absolutely right. The local roads program could use some support and guidance from the Maine DOT. So great. Barbara, like to hear your question. What's up?
Thank you, Jim. Just one couple of things. One, in the criteria that you had, I didn't see proximity for school children to be able to walk or bike safely to school. It seems to me that is important. You know, my statistics say that, you know, most people are trying to get places within about 3 miles of where they live. Anyhow, I think that might be a consideration. The other thing, Jim, is, you know, I'm kind of wondering where this all hits the road. And for me, it comes down to money. And do you have a sense from working with DOT that, you know, if we're really active and we give a lot of feedback and so forth, that, you know, they're open to new allocations of funds to address these problems? Because if not, it's going to be a little frustrating.
I do think that that's the case. And I think that, you know, one of the reasons the DOT, you know, and was happy to have BCM part of the team is because they knew that we were going to be able to rally our constituencies to really let them know, you know, what the reality is out there and what is perceived as needed. So I think that, you know, if the active transportation community speaks with, you know, a loud and clear voice, you will see changes. And, you know, and I'd emphasize too that, you know, the DOT is making changes. You know, they are putting more money at bike ped these days than they ever have. And the whole active transportation program is getting a lot more attention at the highest level. So I think, you know, the DOT is like a big cruise ship. It doesn't really steer very fast, but I think that ship is definitely turning, and it's turning in a direction that is increasingly supportive of the needs of people walking and bicycling. So, you know, it's easy sometimes to get discouraged in this line of work with, you know, the proliferation of fossil fuel vehicles and giant pickup trucks everywhere. But, you know, there is progress being made, and the Maine DOT deserves some credit for, you know, taking steps in the right direction. And I see this plan being formally, you know, created and adopted as part of the long range transportation plan is some evidence of that.
Thank you, Jim.
Other questions or anyone, let's see, anything in the chat box, Matt?
Yeah. Somebody asked which breakout group is the rail trail?
Well, okay, folks. So certainly you can talk about the rail trail in the active transportation group. And we think that that would be, great. And we expect that conversation. I think that, there's probably also going to be a number of people joining the rail plan and having some thoughts about corridors around the state. So my guess is that, the active transportation plan is the one that's looking at really closely at the four corridors that I described. But I think that, either the AT plan or the rail plan will offer the opportunity to provide input about other corridors that you think should be included in the list of, corridors for consideration for possible conversion.
Okay. We have another one that says, do you know what the timeline is for drafting, finalizing, and enacting these plans?
My understanding is, based on a meeting we had earlier this week, that drafts are going to be available for public review, I think starting in November. So it's they're happen to have it mostly wrapped up in a year. And most of the work that BCM and VHB are going to be doing, kind of compiling the data sets and the information, is really front loaded for the period between now and really like mid to late May. Okay.
Are there any states that we can look to as models with great active transportation plans?
That's a great question. And my guess is yes. Massachusetts has come up a bunch of times as a plan that as a state that's got a pretty good bike ped plan. Vermont's got some stuff, and as part of the policy review, we are looking at what states nearby are doing, because we feel that that's the most germane comparison to Maine. We also look at other New England states. That's not part of our specific scope of work, but that's a good one to bring back to the group, and I'll do that. Sarah probably has some thoughts on that, and she might have already done some exploration about alternative plans. But I know that Massachusetts plan has come up a couple times as an analog to ours.
Okay. I love the topic of this next one. Will maintenance of bike lanes or sidewalks be factored in to ensure they're not used to dump snow, park vehicles, etc.?
So this is really a policy level question, and again, the input that needs to make it into the plan is that policies must be adopted that ensure that if active transportation infrastructure is built, it is maintained with the same attention to care that we see applied to the roads. So I think that, that is an issue that we hear about statewide. The bike lane gets built and it doesn't really get plowed. And that needs to change, and adopting statewide policies, will help. MaineDOT doesn't have control over what happens on every road in every town. But I think, more policy level recommendations that say that needs to be addressed in a systemic kind of way will help get that message across. So again, make sure that comment gets into the system.
Okay, another great one here. Has bike share come up as something the state is considering?
So yes, yep. And there's a couple of conversations around bike shares that are going on. There is a very preliminary conversation about a kind of bike libraries, an e-bike library system that the DOT is interested in talking about. Very preliminary, but the idea is that if we hosted small fleets of e-bikes at libraries that had the wherewithal, interest, and capability of kind of hosting a small fleet, it would permit us to get people to try e-bikes, to do loaners and understand this technology. And we are really bullish on e-bikes, because e-bikes are the kind of thing that people who don't have any interest in riding a bike have an interest in riding an e-bike. If you've ever been on an e-bike, they are fantastically fun, and they are a great transition for people to get out of cars and into active transportation. And so DOT is looking at that, and so are we. You know, you may be aware that a bike share is slated to come to Portland soon. And I think there's been some preliminary discussions up in Bangor. I don't know that it's not a major part of the plan, but it probably will wind up being a recommendation somewhere in the policy environment. Yeah. Barbara's got her hand up. Let's take one from the floor for a minute, Matt.
Yep.
We've got it.
Jim, are speed limits a valid thing to comment on in the policy section? And I'm particularly concerned that active transportation doesn't have any role in the formula for deciding, on speed limits. Is this an area that would be fair game?
Absolutely. I do suggest that people make comments about speed limits. I mean, Angela and I can tell you, we hear about speed limits and about people's concerns about speeding traffic and about the way in which speed limits are set every month, if not every week. I mean, we're getting into the season where it'll be every week. It is a huge concern to Mainers, and you should absolutely put a comment in there that says, some changes have to be made in how speed limits are calculated. The reliance on the 85th percentile, is never going to completely go away. And that's engineering speak for one of the metrics that they use to set the speed limit. It's the, for kind of simplification, it's the speed that about 85% of the drivers will drive at or below. Sometimes that speed limit, though, that 85th percentile is above the speed limit. And when that happens, DOT ratchets it upwards, irrespective of context. We're really trying to get them to consider context a lot more. That means, like, is this a neighborhood street? Is it densely surrounded? Is there a likelihood that there's going to be a lot of active transportation users on that road? They need to think about it differently. So absolutely, please make comments about the speed limit policy and about the need for it to take into account context and, the human scale of users. Yeah.
That kind of comes into the question in the chat box by Jennifer Ladd. Does the active transportation include indirect support by DOT for active transportation? For example, prioritizing narrow lane widths, lowering speed limits, smaller turning radii, etc.
All comments that we want to get into the plan so that they
Right.
become part of the whole recommendations palette. Absolutely. I mean, in the policy review, I got a chance to look through a lot of the things that Sarah had compiled. I mean, she's got a spreadsheet that's pages long with hundreds and hundreds of policy entries. And, I've already put some cheering in there for narrower travel lanes, for using narrower travel lanes up to context of 35 miles per hour, of just really thinking about geometric design as ways to calm traffic. So yeah, it's all on the table, Jen. Throw it in there. Make your recommendations and make sure, again, that they get in through either, the public meeting is going to be a conversation like this. So there will be, it will be recorded. There'll be a chat recorded too. But really, the PEMA site and the survey are going to be the critical places where your information is going to get in a written digital form that can be probably pulled out and used in other ways. So I think that's really important that we get content onto those platforms.
So we have a question. Is this plan going to be aspirational, resource constrained, or a hybrid?
I would call it a hybrid. I mean, everything's resource constrained, so that's a given. It's aspirational in that it is going to be charting out, a series of guidelines that are going to be imperfectly applied. And I think that, it's a place to begin, but it's also, something that can be used to kind of ask for accountability. It's like, the plan says this is the kind of way it's going to be done, and this is the set of guidelines that are in place. So, once it's in a plan format, it'll help everyone who's interested in making the road safer for vulnerable users to have, really a reference point to go back to and say, well, are you following the dictates of the plan? I think, frankly, it is aspirational, and you know, I'm part of my role, I think, on the team is to sort of push the envelope as to what we aspire towards. So I've been dialed back once or twice, but you know, I think that I've been getting a good hearing, and the needs of people walking and biking are first and foremost in this team's mind. And VHB and you know, the team, Tony Grande, Phil Goff, guys that I've worked with, you know, over the years a bunch of times, and they completely get it. They are completely supportive of it. They are both active transportation users themselves. I mean, the team that's working on this really gets it, and they're trying to, you know, provide the most robust plan possible. You know, but they're also dealing with, you know, what DOT is ultimately going to accept. You know, that's a reality.
Okay, we have a question. You mentioned a review of class 3 and 4 roads. Does that mean 1 and 2 rated roads are out of the scope for the active transportation plan?
No, they're not out of the scope, and comments about those corridors are invited and welcomed. What it means is that the HCP 3 and 4 assessment is like it's kind of a tack on sort of piece to the plan. It was kind of an addendum that was tacked on late in the process of formulating the plan. So no, you can absolutely talk about higher priority corridors, but you know, the 3 and 4, it just seemed to make kind of sense to throw it in with the AT plan, because those are roads that you know, active transportation users use a lot, and there's a real opportunity here to perhaps identify some critical roadways that need shoulders that are, you know, not the main roads, but are those back roads that do see a lot of bike and pedestrian traffic, and we know they're out there. Because you know, the people in the absence of anything else, people are going to walk on their local road, and they're going to need a shoulder to do it, or ride their bike there. And where there is need, we want to make sure we're identifying that road should be prioritized for a treatment.
There's a question. Do you know when the survey will be released? How will it be shared with the public?
The survey is supposed to be, I mean, we're trying to push it along. Our questions are coming together. The DOT is setting the survey up so that it's like every one of the plans is going to have its own survey, and they really don't want them to overlap. They want them to run, you know, concurrently. And so it sounds like the transit survey, I think, is going to be the first one, and then we will run after that. We're trying to get the duration of time that the survey is open up to 3 weeks, partly in order to make sure that, you know, underserved populations have the opportunity to hear about it and find a way to get some input into it. You know, BCM will be, you know, sending out lots of notifications to y'all when the survey is ready. You know, if necessary, we'll have another webinar and talk about, you know, how to navigate it and use it if necessary. You know, we want to be here at every step of the way to make sure you guys are well informed to participate in the plan. So, yep, stay tuned. That's all I can tell you right now.
There's an individual request we received, to just letting you know, Jim, to look for an email as soon as you finish this webinar, because it's time sensitive.
Okay, will do.
Going to the next question. Is there any accommodation for rails to trails to keep the rail ROW to preserve it for potential future rail use?
Well, that's pretty much the default. So in Maine, the way the law is written for conversion of a rail corridor to trail, it's always just for interim use. So, you know, as a matter of law and state policy and DOT policy, all conversions of rail to trail are trail until rail. The idea being that let's do something with this corridor that's productive and useful and beneficial to the public until such time as it seems feasible to, you know, put a functioning rail line back in, and then a conversation happens around that. So yeah, so there that provision of theoretically converting a trail back absolutely exists. And there's a number of projects. There's one being planned. It's in preliminary engineering right now that would do rail with trail, which is a proven model that works elsewhere around the country and world. So, you know, I mean, active transportation users do have a stake in the rail universe too. You know, and if such time it makes sense to put a rail line back in, you know, that could certainly happen.
That's it in terms of the questions in the chat.
Okay, any more questions from the floor, anybody? I see Christine Keeney's got her hand up. Hi, Christine.
Hey, I just put it in the chat, but just to reiterate for everyone else, I think one of the big things for me in terms of priorities is MaineDOT actually implementing their complete streets policy 100% of the time. In my experience working with projects all over the state, the default is to not include bike ped facilities, even if there are prior plans or specific routes that call out a need for a bike ped facility, particularly a traffic separated one. And oftentimes individual communities have to beg for those facilities to be included, and they are denied because that's too expensive and apparently not relevant to their complete streets policy, or it is approved and the communities are on the hook specifically for the bike ped portion of the projects, but not the vehicular portion of the projects. That is not fair. And it also is not in line with their own policy. And it is particularly not fair to communities that cannot afford it. So I just wanted to put
Agreed.
that out there. I hope that we can change that as part of this process.
Yeah, and you know, completely agree. And I've been beating that drum, you know, about the local share required to get a bike ped project in. Has always seemed to me to be you know, something that the DOT could do in a more equitable fashion with respect to modes.
The other thing, Jim, really
I have-
quickly,
okay,
I
go
don't know
ahead.
if you've run into this problem before. One thing I've heard from some communities and also trail groups is they've struggled with local project administration and where they don't necessarily either have someone who is qualified to do it or someone that actually has the capacity to actually manage projects on the
Sure.
local level. And for example, the Eastern Trail Close the Gap project is one of those that I think some of the project management was likely capacity issues to be able to move that forward in a timely way. And I don't know if that's something that could potentially be addressed as part of this.
Absolutely,
this process as
Christina.
well.
In a lot of ways, like the questions and the things you guys are raising, this is like a dress rehearsal for the public meeting and for some of the input. So, I mean, this is, I'm glad we're having this because you guys are thinking about all the right things. And I think that, you know, those observations are very important to get into the record, Christine. So make sure you do them. I will say that you know, as part of the process, we've had a chance to review the draft updated complete streets policy. And I've been pushing hard to make it as aspirational and inspirational as we can. And it is a significant improvement over the existing policy that provides multiple layers of accountability and just ways to sort of like, let's have a reality check here. I've also, so I'll throw this out to you because I know this is one that you're aware of. You should put a comment in that talks about perhaps using FHW guidance with respect to you know, what kind of facility goes on what kind of road, because that's something that we've been talking about. I know that's something that you've raised before. You know, what is the guideline for what kind of facility goes on what kind of road? Federal Highway has some stuff, and I know that you've used their guidance extensively in conversation with the DOT. And so make sure that perspective gets in the public record.
And their guidance is pretty clear based on speed limit on a road.
Right.
In terms of what facility is necessary, and seemingly that just kind of gets ignored. So totally agree. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Barbara, I assume this is the same Barbara.
Jim, you've made some great points, and Christine, thank you. You just made some great points. And it strikes me that I may not be aware of some of the issues that I should raise in my comments. So I'm just wondering, is there any way for BCM to, kind of collate some of the issues that are worth commenting on? Because I don't do this 24/7, Jim, but I'd like to have my comments reinforce things that are, like complete streets that are already on the table and need some additional emphasis. So that would be my first question, if we could have those additional bullet points and things that to raise our awareness of some of these things. And the second thing is BCM is doing a great job, doing this seminar and reaching out to us and trying to get us thinking about this. And I'm just wondering, are there other partners, partner groups who have networks who are also trying to raise awareness in their membership and get them to comment on the active transportation plan?
Absolutely. I mean, our outreach has, really been not just confined to emailing our members, but, AARP is doing some outreach for us, MPHA. We've got, we've sent notifications about, the public process to all of our stakeholders, all of our partners, and we're going to continue doing that. I mean, really, I feel like we're just kind of getting the whole public engagement, cart built and rolling. So I think that you're going to hear more and more and more as more and more people pick up the message and spread it around. The nice thing about the PEMA site is that there is an input mechanism that's going to be open the whole time. It's going to be whenever you get there, you can go there. They call it the virtual public meeting tool. So you will be able to, offer comments throughout the process.
Thank you.
Yep.
We can put
Well-
something together with some bullet points for things to talk about. And so in the news site that we shared before, the bikemaine.org/news, you can see on the side, there's a category that we just added, that's Statewide Active Transportation Plan. So feel free to bookmark that. And we'll add something there with some points, some talking points. And then also we'll update across social media anytime that we update, make an update to that news page.
Great, thanks, Matt. And Angela has been kind of capturing the kind of high level takeaways from this conversation. I mean, this whole thing is being recorded, but we wanted to, I think in the conversation, there were going to be some policy imperatives that were sort of coming up. And so that can probably be the backbone of Matt's bullet points of the types of things that come up. But really, your comment can be as broad as, I am sick and tired of cars going too fast on my street. What can we do about it? Can we change road design to do something about that? You don't have to be a policy wonk or an expert to offer comments here. It's like your genuine, unvarnished experience as a person walking or bicycling on a main road is absolutely what they need to hear. So please, you don't need to know the nuances of, setting a speed limit or something like that. All you need to know is, this is how my experience on the roads is going. How can we make it better? So I think that very genuine personal response and reaction and capturing that in a comment will be hugely valuable. I mean, that's the kind of qualitative information that the DOT needs to hear, frankly, all the time. More often, they need to hear people saying, it's like, I'm afraid to walk on my own street because people are driving like nuts on it. I think they know that, but when we get 1,000 comments on that issue, what goes from being sort of common sense anecdotal knowledge actually has a number behind it, and numbers are powerful, and what is counted matters, as they say sometimes. So please, lots of comments, and don't worry about your expertise. Say what you think you need to say what your personal experience is. If you know more about policy and have some recommendations, we've had some great policy recommendations here come out of this conversation, some of which, well, I know that a couple of the team members are on this call, so they heard them too. There are there's some good stuff that's already come out of this as part of the public process. So thank you very much for your participation. We've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. I'd just like to note that the voice that you were hearing, I don't know if it was clear, that's Matt Sulam, who is our communications manager. He's been the guy who's been taking care of all of the notifications that you've been receiving about the process. And Angela King, our advocacy manager, is the other voice that you've been hearing from the BCM team. We've also got our new Safe Routes to School manager, Dan Bassett, with us. He's new to the organization, but if you have Safe Routes to School issues and want to talk about safety near schools, and that question did come up early, and certainly proximity to schools and residences and trip drivers is indeed some of the stuff we're looking at as we look at prioritizing corridors. But Dan is your go-to guy for some of the Safe Routes to School stuff going forward. So please don't be shy about being in touch. With that, I'd like to wish you all a great day. Thank you very much again for participating. We'll see you all Tuesday night, right? Some of you will be getting a stakeholder invitation soon, and we'll be in touch when we have more details on the survey, and you'll be getting ongoing notifications about the PEMA site. So with that, Jim Tassi from the Bicycle Coalition of Maine signing off. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you.